Welcome YouTube to another D&D Fridays. As usual, it's your host, The Geek Life. Today we'll be discussing a interesting topic on how to really continue a story or span a story across multiple campaigns, and and also during those campaigns, if you decide to really like bring back maybe past enemies that the players might have defeated or something, how to trek across that thin line there without really taking away a victory from the players. But before we do, don't forget hit the notification bell, subscribe on down below, and leave a comment on what you think of the subject and if you ever spanned a story across multiple campaigns. How did you do some of this stuff? Would love to hear more.
Yep.
So when we think about this, usually it's about some sort of like long arcing story or maybe multiple bad guys or something like that. Maybe as PCs you're trying to take down like multiple crime lords across the world. So maybe one campaign you're dealing with triads, and then you're going to the New York City Mafia in the next one. So how do you go about doing something like that? Um, so I think having multiple campaigns where you're taking on different characters to go about those challenges is an interesting way of going about it. And then maybe like campaign number four or whatever it might be kind of brings everything together somehow, some way. That could be a way of doing
Yeah,
things.
have some sort of meta story to each of your camp helps bridge each of them together so that in the last, your trilogy or your quadrilogy, you you bring it all and tie it all together. I think that's an interesting way of thinking about it. Um,
Yeah, yeah, kind of. To me, it kind of lends itself towards this whole epic heroic journey type of thing. Um, as when you have overarching stories like that that's interconnected some way, you kind of see yourself as really this big bad PC in the world doing these multiple things, and it's always interesting to see how things tie together. Especially when you're nearing the end of one of the later campaigns, you're like, oh yeah, I remember this happened, or I remember we didn't do this correctly in the second campaign. Now those consequences are coming back to
right.
bite us in the
I think
butt
that's
in the
actually
fourth
a
campaign.
really good way to bridge different campaigns and bring characters or situations from a prior campaign into a later campaign is side quests that weren't tied off completely or a spurned bad guy, spurned friend, these little breadcrumbs that you've left in your prior campaigns. I think that's a good way to pull things into your next campaign.
Yep. And I also think that it also helps with maybe there's some stuff that you wanted to do in a campaign, but you couldn't because maybe you didn't have enough time, or you didn't want to take away from player agency or whatever it may be. So maybe you can take some of those things and into a second or third campaign and kind of just bridge the gap there and kind of expand upon your world quite a bit. Maybe the first campaign you were dealing with stuff in like one city or region or something like that, and in the second campaign you dealt with some consequences or whatnot in a different region of the world or the kingdom or
Yeah,
whatever it may
definitely.
be.
I think there's a lot of different ways of doing that. Um, and you say you bring up the example of a kingdom, right? You could always it could be one or two generations later, and there's a new king, or there's something that happens with the prince that remembers what the prior party did earlier on. Um, there's a lot of these little hooks that you can always use to bring that sort of um, that sub mission or part of the world your world back into play.
Mm-hmm. Like and I find it so interesting because I'm actually doing something like that now with my campaign, and if you're one of my current players, please like hit the mute button or go off the video or something like that now. But just just be able to like weave into this third campaign just some of the stuff from the first two campaigns where it's like these current players will be able to go back, maybe like meet some of their earlier characters, and they kind of figure out that oh, some of the stuff that we've seen, it's actually being taken into account now by this big bad guy here that may or may not be like a big mastermind behind some of that stuff that
Yeah,
happened in the first
yeah.
few campaigns. So
I was
just
just, I think that's an
uh,
intriguing idea, bringing back PCs as NPCs in later campaigns and showing how they've evolved or what they're doing now. Um, if anybody watches Critical Role, there's been a running joke in this second campaign of theirs about who's on the Taldori Council. Anytime that they talk about the old part of the world that they were in, the players always bring up that question, right? So, um, no spoilers. If you watch it, you'll see. If you've already seen it, then the butt of the joke there. But I think that's also an interesting way to tie campaigns together is turning the PCs into NPCs and introducing them somehow.
yeah. And I think your players will definitely get a good kick out of that, when they see some of their favorite PCs or and stuff like that come make a grand return. They're like, "Oh, sweet! I really love this character. Now I'll be able to like converse with him or her or whatever, and make it can really make things
Yeah,
so much cooler."
definitely has that excitement about it for sure.
Yep. And then kind of like going off of that, if if you bring back PCs and NPCs and whatnot from earlier campaigns, what if you wanted to bring back an enemy that the players might have fought or whatever from earlier campaigns? How is that a possibility to do in a
Yeah,
later campaign? Especially if it happened to be like a big bad, um, like the BBG or something like that. How do you deal with that? Like the whole trickiness with that is if that's something you want to do, how do you do that without cheapening the outcome of what actually happened with that? I think that could, if done right, I think it's a very interesting idea and interesting thing to do. But I think it's one of those little fine lines that you can't just say, "Hey, I know you killed this guy like
yeah,
2 years ago.
yeah. No,
He's
I
back.
think it's a little
No
bit
problem."
dangerous to try and resurrect your BBEGs and just pull them forward. You want to do something a little bit more creative, a little bit more subtle. Um, what if one of the underlings of the BBEG escaped and wasn't actually killed in that final fight and has this vow of vengeance, right? Because you killed his master or whatever. Um, or they had a daughter or a son, or there's some other connection to where they try and mimic what the old BBG was like. So it's new but extremely familiar, and you don't bring back the actual NPC, but a very very close facsimile of it, right? I think there's ways to be able to do that kind of stuff and not just bing. All right, the old dude's back. Good luck.
Yeah, like it's definitely tricky. Was you never want to just, like to your point, just revive that guy or whatever and have to do the fight all over again. You want to be able to have some good reason of coming up with something like that. Um, like, what's your thoughts on on like maybe like the new big bad evil guy maybe being like yeah, those guys were just my puppets. I'm the true like big bad evil guy that was over them, and maybe I might reanimate them as some sort of like zombies or something like that under my control to serve me once again. Of course, that decreased battle tactics and stuff.
I mean, as
What's
long
your
as it
thoughts
fits
on stuff like
within
that?
the story that you're trying to weave, I don't necessarily have a problem with that. Obviously, you don't want to do, super inception with something like that. You know, having one overboss like that might make sense, but if you decide that you want to have the over boss and then the over boss, like then you're just basically, beating the dead horse, a little bit more, a little bit longer. So I think that's an interesting way to do it. To say that some of the BBEGs from the first few campaigns are really just puppets to a grander master, right? I think that works really well when you introduce a godlike character in a third or fourth type of campaign, and
Hmm.
these were all followers of that character. So yeah, as long as it's done well, I think it would be something that could be enjoyable.
Yep, I definitely agree, um, and I think the key phrase that I really liked that you said was as long as it makes sense. I think it'll be able to work. Um, it has to make sense to the story, and in a way where the players doesn't seem like uh perfectly fine. It's like we never killed
I
him
think there's got to
before
be
type of
just a
thing.
tinge of reality in there about um, how many puppets there can be. Usually you're not going to have, as I said, multiple layers of puppet masters. You're going to just have maybe one or two at most, at like extreme most. But yeah, I think that's where you want to center your thoughts when you're thinking about doing this kind of stuff.
Yep, agree. And so it's always that fine line. Is it something that you might want to talk to your players about before you run? Maybe. Depends on what you're trying to do. Um, Sometimes it might be good to not outright state that from the start, because it could have some sort of like surprise factor um, type
Yeah,
of thing.
I think gauging their interest in that sort of story, and I guess by that I mean, are they willing to stick, with this group, with this DM for 3, 4 campaigns? Are they in it for the long haul? And that this is a possibility? Maybe have that conversation, and I would agree with you there. But I also agree that you don't want to just come out and be like, all right, campaign one is, part one of six. Campaign two is part two of six. You you want to try and have a little bit of surprise and intrigue, and you know use that as an element of telling the story.
Yeah, and depending on how long your campaigns run, I think that'll play into how many of these story-based campaigns that you want to do. I personally don't think that there should be more than like maybe like 3 or 4 or something like that within a whole like list of campaigns. As as I think it's one of those things where it's like if you have multiple campaigns set in like the same like setting or world or something like that, yeah, that's perfectly fine. But in terms of like interconnected campaigns, where in terms of if you have like similar characters in different campaigns, yeah, sure, whatever. But stories that are based off of one another, I think that's where the try not to have more than like
Yeah,
three or
no,
four.
I agree
I
with
would
that.
say.
And even if you don't end up having the same group as you try and string these together, and you still want to have that surprise factor and you want to pull things forward, it works just as well if there's even just one or two people from the old groups in your new group when you're trying to do your connected story, right? Because they can share what happened with the rest of the players in the earlier campaigns, and it'll get them excited, and it gets the player a little bit more involved. So I think there's that aspect to it also. But I totally agree with you that you probably don't want to drag it out more than 3, 4 campaigns in a row.
Yeah. Because then I think it will become this whole grandiose scheme type of thing where you might like lose a lot of that luster from the first couple of campaigns or notes
Just
or
like any
whatever it
TV
might
series that
might
runs too
be.
long.
Yep. And depending on your thoughts, that we may or may not be talking about you. Uh, what's
Oh,
that show called?
yeah.
SVU
Law and
and
Order.
stuff like that. Yep,
No,
that's been running for what,
yeah, it's
19
been
seasons
on
or
TV
20 something
forever.
seasons.
I've lost track.
But yeah, always be mindful when it comes to things like that. Um, but on the other hand, like mentioned before, if you want to have like another campaign and in the same world, just maybe you're referencing the same characters, but it's like a whole different type of campaign idea or story. That
Yep.
is totally fine to do.
Yep.
Totally fine. Um, and I guess when it comes to that, there could be like maybe two ways of doing that. This you can either each campaign have your PCs roll up new characters each time, or you could say, hey, the first campaign is going to be tier 1 level of
Yeah.
play, 1 through 5. Second campaign is tier 2 level of play. So there's definitely those two different types of
Yeah.
ways of going
I
about
think that's
it.
actually a really good idea. Is instead of making a four, 3 or 4, 15 to 18 level campaigns, you split it up in tier one, tier two, tier three, 1 through 5, 5 through 10, 10 through or 11 through 15. I know I duplicated one there, but um, I actually think that's a really interesting idea.
hmm So I think both are very viable, and it depends on what type of story you want to do. I think each have their own merits to each one. Like with the campaigns based off of the tier of play, your PCs get to really stick with their same character and see their growth and everything. But with the other type, you get that whole I get to converse with my old character as an NPC type of thing. So there's definitely a lot of fun to be had with both areas. So is a multiple campaign story for everybody? Probably not. But is it a fun way of going about D&D? I think it can be. It's definitely one of those things where if you as a GM is interested in it and you have a group of players that isn't opposed to something like that, I think it's definitely a good thing to try out at least once in your DMing career. And if you're a player, I think it's pretty nice to experience at least once in your playing career. Either which way, definitely fun. And I think offers a lot of unique fun and
Yep.
challenges and stuff like that. Yeah. And without further ado, definitely comment down below on on if you've experienced anything like this, whether you're GM in something like this, playing in something like this. Definitely interested to hear more about maybe what might be your experience in one of these types of story-based campaigns. But with that, we'll call today a wrap. And until next time, you two,
Bye, everyone.
keep y'all's lives geeky.